let's talk about something critical, a scenario that analysts are warning isn't getting nearly enough attention. What would happen if the state of Iran collapsed? Now, we're not going to get into the politics here. We're going to focus on the potential for a massive humanitarian crisis, a possibility with absolutely staggering implications that it seems the world is just ignoring.
So let's just get straight to the big question. If you put all the politics to one side and just think about the raw numbers, what actually happens when a country of 88 million people, that's more than 4 times the size of pre-war Syria, starts to fall apart?
That's why some are calling this the refugee scenario nobody is discussing. And look, if history has taught us anything, it's that we have a really bad track record here. From Iraq to Libya to Syria, the international community has been caught completely flat-footed time and time again by just how many people are displaced and how fast it all happens.
All right, so let's dig into what's being called the displacement arithmetic. This is where the numbers start to get genuinely hard to wrap your head around.
So to start, let's just do a really simple direct comparison. On the left, you've got Syria before its civil war with a population of about 21 million people. And on the right, Iran today with 88 million. We are talking about a country that is more than 4 times larger.
And this chart, wow, it just hammers home the sheer difference in scale. The crisis in Syria was a generation-defining event. A crisis in Iran would be starting from a baseline that is just astronomically larger. And that's a point you really have to keep in mind as we go forward. Okay, so during the Syrian civil war, an incredible 62% of the entire population was displaced. Think about that. That's 13 million out of 21 million people who were forced to run from their homes, either somewhere else in the country or across a border. It's basically a society completely unraveling.
So, here's the terrifying thought experiment. What happens when you take that number, that 62% displacement rate from a recent modern civil war, and you apply it to a population of 88 million people?
The number you get is 54 million. Just let that sink in for a second. 54 million people. That is more than the entire population of Spain. It's more than the entire population of South Korea. And even if you use more conservative estimates, say from what happened in Iraq or Afghanistan, you're still looking at somewhere between 14 to 21 million people on the move. A number like 54 million it's just an abstraction, right? But the immediate devastating reality of that would be felt on Iran's borders. Which brings us to the next critical part of this, a crisis on 4 different borders. Because the huge question is, where would all of these people possibly go?
You know, when you look at the map, you realize Iran's neighbors are completely, profoundly unequipped for this. Turkey, it already hosts the world's largest refugee population. Iraq is still dealing with its own displaced people. Pakistan is in the middle of a brutal economic crisis. And Afghanistan? A refugee flow into Afghanistan would mean people are literally fleeing one disaster right into the middle of the world's worst humanitarian catastrophe. There's just no safety valve. And, of course, a crisis of this magnitude, it's never going to stay regional. It just can't. Which leads us straight to the global ripple effect. Because when a crisis overwhelms Iran's neighbors, it is inevitably going to show up on Europe's doorstep.
I mean, just think back to 2015. The arrival of 1.3 million people strained the European Union to its absolute breaking point. It fueled the rise of far-right politics and was even a factor in Brexit. And that was with 1.3 million people. So you can see the chain reaction, right? The dominoes falling. First, mass displacement from Iran. Second, the neighboring countries are completely overwhelmed. Third, those refugee flows start moving towards and through Turkey. And fourth, a wave of people that could be 10 times larger than what Europe saw in 2015, which would almost certainly cause its asylum systems to collapse. And that brings us to the final and maybe the most alarming point of all this. For this potential catastrophe, there is no plan. The source material argues we've seen this movie before, over and over again for the last 25 years. Military interventions consistently create these massive displacement crises that nobody ever planned for. And in the end, the humanitarian fallout becomes even more destabilizing than the original conflict itself. The very organizations that are supposed to handle this stuff, they are just not ready. The UN's refugee agency is already underfunded by billions of dollars and, according to the source, has 0 operational contingency plans for a mass displacement event out of Iran. Nothing. And this quote, it just sums up the stakes perfectly. As one analyst put it, the probability of this happening might be low, but the magnitude is civilizational. It's the absolute definition of a low probability, high impact event that we are simply not preparing for.
So we're left with this. It's really uncomfortable to even think about because it forces us to confront the true human cost of all this geopolitical maneuvering. Should the world be planning for this scenario? And if the worst happens, whose responsibility do those 54 million people become?